Howdy, my name is Katie Munson, and my research topic is how do graphic organizers affect reading comprehension? The reason I chose this topic is because I'm the interventionist at an elementary campus, and I've noticed a constant struggle with comprehending a text. Our district follows a very strict guideline for the curriculum we use, so I wanted to implement something that would follow the guidelines and the verbatim text the teacher has to read, but hopefully help students comprehend. So I chose the strategy of completing graphic organizers. For my literature review, the National Reading Panel cited that graphic organizers are one of the main types of instructional strategies to improve reading instruction and comprehension. The purpose is to provide learners with a meaningful framework for relating their existing knowledge to new information. They help make text more accessible and comprehensible than the entirety of an expository or narrative text, and they're successful when they have connected prior knowledge with what is being learned and identified relationships between those ideas. The first subcategory I'm focusing on is how and when to use graphic organizers. The purpose is to analyze the learning task for important words and concepts, arrange them to show interrelationships and patterns between concepts, evaluate the simplicity and effectiveness of the visual, and substitute empty slots for new information during active reading. For types of graphic organizers, organizers are classified into 5 forms, which are listed. And then those are organized into 6 different categories that fit into the 5 forms. And lastly, they are classified into 8 categories according to their purpose for learning. For learning disabled students and English language learners, the benefits of graphic organizers for those students are as follows. They transfer a large amount of information to the student with the time and availability that are involved. They develop the learner's ability to infer and understand relationships and connect information to meaningful learning. And they enable the learner to control their learning of the subject, which develops their cognitive development. So my district uses the Fontes and Pinnell program for reading. I use the leveled literacy intervention, and the content teachers use guided reading portion. The student is given a level, which is the same level for LLI and guided reading, which is great for my data analysis that I'll discuss later. And there's a link to the Fontes and Pinnell program if you want to check it out. So for my pre-reading, in the literature review for how and when to use graphic organizers and the actions and my methods, these are examples of pre-reading graphic organizers. The purpose is to activate prior knowledge and build on that. These will be completed before reading the text, and the student will continue to fill them in as they read the story. These are some examples of post-reading graphic organizers. The reason these need to wait until after the text is read is because it will require the student to go back and think about what they read while filling these out, which in return is giving the student more exposure to that text and requiring them to think through the process. So moving on to my theoretical framework, I chose the trans-theoretical model, or stages of change theory. There are 6 stages that the learner goes through. Each stage assesses a learner's willingness to change and ultimately form a positive habit, in my case using graphic organizers to comprehend a text. The first stage is pre-contemplation. The learner does not see a problem, but the educator knows there has to be some sort of intervention to change their problem, in my case reading comprehension, by introducing the strategy of graphic organizer. The next stage is contemplation. The learner begins to acknowledge that there is a problem but is apprehensive about starting it. They weigh the pros and cons of completing the graphic organizers, and they have to know that it requires the knowledge on how to choose the correct one and how to effectively complete it. The next stage is preparation, and the learner begins to understand that the changes are in fact necessary, and they implement them over a 30-day period. Throughout the research, the student will be taught how to choose the organizer, which one's most effective. This is also the stage when changes must be made. So students with learning disabilities or English language learners are struggling. They need to be retaught during this stage in order to avoid the future consequences in the 6th stage. Throughout the action stage, the learner becomes more familiar with the process, and it moves from a more teacher-directed approach to an individual approach. During maintenance, the learner continues using graphic organizers and resists the urge to discontinue using them. The last stage is termination, which is rarely reached. During this stage, the learner refuses to implement the change and reverts back to pre-contemplation, and the cycle repeats itself. For my setting, it is in a Title I district in a rural setting. The research group is a small group of students in an elementary school consisting of 4 to 7 students per group. And these students attend the small group sessions 4 days a week, 45 minutes per day. There are 16 fifth graders and 7 fourth graders for the participants. They are 2 or more grade levels behind in reading comprehension, and 70% of that population has been tested for dyslexia or special ed between 3rd and 4th grade, but they did not qualify. They're all considered at risk due to academics. For my methods, I have chosen to use a quantitative approach to collecting and analyzing data. I'm going to use a Likert type rating scale for a pre- and post-reading assessment. The students will read the title and the story summary, and then fill it out before and after they read. I will also use a series of 10 comprehension questions as a formative assessment for each story. I'll use unit tests provided by the district for summative assessment data. This is the Likert type scale that the students will complete prior to and after reading. They're encouraged to be honest with their answers because their formative assessment grade will reflect their answer choice on this. I'll use a pie graph to represent the data in the pre- and post-reading scale. This is an example of a pre-reading scale, and I based it off of the 16 fifth graders I have. Keep in mind this is just an example, as I've not conducted the research yet. This is an example of the post-reading scale, and the student's perception of what they understood has changed. And this is the comparison between the pre- and post-reading scales side by side. The numerical grades the student make on their formative assessment should coincide with this data. These are examples of the histogram I will complete to show the correlation between the pre-reading score, the post-reading score, and the formative score. I based the ratings on a scale of 100 since there are 10 comprehension questions, and each number the student chooses on the Likert scale represents 20 points. I'm not looking for a perfect score on the rating scale, but I do want the post-reading scale and the formative grade to be pretty close. These are more examples of the histogram, but you can see here though that the students selected that they knew a lot about what they read. However, their score is not reflecting that. This is the kind of data that raises red flags. The teacher needs to question what went wrong. Was it the graphic organizer chosen, the type of text read, or is this student showing a trend? This histogram shows the comparison between using a graphic organizer on level K in a small group and not using one on that same level in their guided reading group. Again, this is just an example of where I think my research will lead, but the light blue is the small group assessment and the dark is their reading comprehension assessment in their content class. This is the kind of visual that gains the attention of teachers and shows them the benefit of implementing the strategy. When my research is complete, I plan on presenting my findings to my coworkers, other interventionists, literacy coaches, and campus administration. In conclusion, I propose that graphic organizers will have a positive effect on boosting comprehension in my study group. Through the stages of change theory, I will instruct students on how to choose an appropriate graphic organizer for each particular text and how to thoroughly complete the graphic organizer so that it will be beneficial to them. My study will occur with my group of lower performing students first, and if the results are positive, they will filter over to content reading classes. Each reading teacher is responsible for guided reading with each student, and eventually all students using graphic organizers should increase comprehension scores across the board. By 4th and 5th grade, graphic organizers are a common supplement that students are accustomed to. Therefore, with precise instruction and targeted intervention, they should be an easy tool to eventually incorporate into all contents for comprehension.